This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 22nd of June 2021, and I am 2J.
I am JM.
And I am Miss K. Again, in case you missed today's headlines, here they are. Daily Nation, for once, MPs are broke like all of us. Speak for yourself. The Standard, grand plan in Uhuru and Raila Power Pact. And The Star, auditor, Sonko hired 33 cops for coast trip.
A bit of a mishmash of headlines.
I know, I don't think there's any line of thought.
No common thread.
Combining all three headlines. But I think I'll start us off with The Standard. So The Standard today is focused on coalition making in preparation for 2022. So in theme with that headline, I'd like to give some unsolicited advice to those attempting to analyze the president's plans.
Yes.
And as we have said in the past, President Uhuru is the least studied politician in our history. And our failure to understand him and his methods has put the political class at a disadvantage and President Uhuru at a distinct advantage. I mean, Raila swore himself in, and instead of arresting him, Uhuru welcomed him into government. Now the media is speculating about 2022, and one thing is certain. Whatever you think he will do, President Uhuru will blindside us and do something outside our normal expectations that will surprise us. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book The Tipping Point, talks of the law of the critical few over the trivial majority.
Yes.
And what President Uhuru and Raila are planning for the country in 2022 will be a disruption. Political disruptions are not caused by many people. They're caused by a few, a critical few. Let me give an example. Lenin in Russia converted only 17 supporters who converted 17 million people to the communist cause. Another one, King Leonidas of Sparta. He fought over 1 million Persians using only 300 soldiers. And according to Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So in 2022, if any politician finds themselves overwhelmed with supporters like Gema, they are the establishment. A new order led by a select group of individuals will blindside them. So question to you, between Ruto and Raila, who is the establishment? And who will invite the disruptive innovation?
Very true. So Winston Churchill once famously said, "There is only one thing worse than fighting with allies, and that is fighting without them." And all of this talk about coalition building got me thinking about how and why those same alliances could fall apart. And that brought me to the failed bromance of the decade, Uhuru-Ruto. Here at the Fifth Estate, we believe that if answers aren't readily available, ask questions. And this has been the country's observation. Something caused the president and his deputy to fall out.
Yes.
And it appears that the breakup was initiated by the president himself. And I have a hunch that the breakup was about trust or a lack of it. So part of the Uhuru-Ruto alliance, we know, included a succession promise that come 2022, Uhuru would support Ruto's bid for the presidency. But the handshake killed that opportunity. And so what does this tell us? Any president would want to ensure that the successor they leave behind is best for country. Could Uhuru be telling us that we should not trust his deputy? 2M pointed out last week that Ruto's Hustler Fund is a fraud that will see Gema voters receive 200 shillings a year if they get into bed with the DP. And this bottom-up economics is untested and unverified rubbish that is designed to trick the public into unrealistic expectations. Not only has the DP started a rival party while still sitting in Jubilee, he has openly defied his boss repeatedly and with no shame. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of the Ruto-related drama. The end of this bromance has signaled that we are at war. War of ideologies, of beliefs, and of a vision for Kenya. And if Winston Churchill was right, we can never be at war without allies and partners.
Yes.
And this leads me to ask, is the president wrong for building alliances with Raila, Gideon, or Kalonzo? In my view, no. In the past 8 years, Uhuru Kenyatta has worked to build a Kenya that is based on dignity, political stability, economic acceleration, and big push investments. and the next 14 months require him to defend that which he has built. Because if the end of the Uhuru-Ruto bromance has taught us anything, it is that there's something about William Ruto that cannot be trusted.
Ladies and gents, I want to talk about BBI. The Constitution, as currently constituted, is good for us, but it is not right for us. It is not taking us to the destination that we want to get to. And that's the difference between what is good and what is right. So today, I would like to remind all the BBI evangelists out there of the works of the Dutch political scientist Arend Lichvaart, who coined the term consociational democracy, something we've been championing here at the Fortune School of Government since 2016.
Yeah.
And this entire concept is what has actually been actualized by BBI. So consociationalism describes a form of power sharing in which political power is proportionally distributed amongst different national ethnic groups in a society. And this form of democracy is recommended for a society such as ours in countries that experience deep divisions along ethnic, religious, or class lines. And in particular, in countries where there's a tendency for one or two groups to dominate the political scene, as we've seen in this country since independence. So allow me to spell and remind the audience what the four core tenets of this democratic model are. Number one, it requires a formation of grand coalition government, which we've been talking about even as a nation. And, you know, come to think of it, since we entered into the multi-party era, we have been inching closer and closer towards governments of a grand coalition nature. In 2000, for example, NDP entered a merger with KANU. In 2002, there was a Rainbow Coalition. In 2007, we had a government of national unity. In 2017, we had a Jubilee Coalition, where many parties collapsed themselves. And so when the president talks about political stabilization as one of the four frames of development, this is what he's referring to, constitutionalizing this practice of coalition formation. The second tenet is mutual veto, and the whole idea there is for political parties to work together, for them to put together frameworks that bring them together and make sure that they have they reach decisions unanimously. You know, all these key stakeholders in the political process, they're all included. The third is proportional representation in elections and appointments to ensure no stakeholders are left behind. This is the spirit of BBI. And the fourth, finally, is what they call segmental autonomy, what we call devolution, which we have done. And you know, this model of consociational democracy, it's practiced in Lebanon, it's practiced in the Netherlands, in Belgium, where the president is currently as we speak, in Switzerland, in Singapore. And so, you know, why should we not just take it on board once the Court of Appeal decides on this matter? Well, we'll see what they say, but you know, the whole idea here is to keep the spirit of BBI alive, because it's what is right for this country.
And there have been so many studies done actually looking at consociational democracy and its linkages to peace and stability, economic growth. So I think that, you know, prioritizing that first has benefits beyond things we can even imagine today.
I think our political culture should influence our laws and not the other way around, and that is our political culture. Therefore, we should institutionalize it because it's what works. We have a three-part criteria that we use to judge the headlines for you. We ask ourselves three questions. Is the headline topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, and thoughtful or just plain lazy? I know for once, MPs are broke like all of us is a bit cheeky and funny, but
it's not true. They're not broke like all of us. They just didn't get their expenses. They still have their monthly salaries.
That's also true. So for that reason, I'm going to toss the Daily Nation, and I'm also going to toss the Star. Nobody cares about Sonko anymore. He's not the governor. Though intriguing, but haven't you heard? And I think we're going to give the winning headline to the Standard. Grand Plan, EU and Raila Power Pact. On to our final thought, but before we get there, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the like button.
And now, our final thought. This week is inspired by political scandals, and we start the week off with a book entitled All the President's Men, written by Bob Woodard and Carl Bernstein. So the presidency of the United States of America is often said to be one of the most powerful positions in the world. But of all the US presidents accused of misusing that power, only one has left office as a result, Richard Nixon. But does Nixon deserve to be remembered for more than the scandal that ended his presidency? So the origins of the Watergate break-in lay in the hostile political climate of the time. By 1972, when Republican President Nixon was running for re-election, the United States was embroiled in the Vietnam War, and the country was deeply divided. But on June 17th, 1972, almost 42 days to the date, right? There was a break-in at the Democratic National Committee's headquarters in the Watergate Complex office. And this was the start of what would be the political crime of the century. Several burglars were arrested, but this was no ordinary robbery. The robbers were connected to Nixon's re-election campaign, and they had been caught wiretapping phones and stealing documents. 2 months later in August, Nixon gave a speech in which he swore that his White House staff were not involved in the break-in. Most voters actually believed him, and in November 1972, the president was re-elected in a landslide victory. But it later came out that Nixon was not being truthful. A few days after the break-in, for example, he arranged to provide hundreds of thousands of dollars in hush money to those burglars. Then, Nixon and his aides hatched a plan to instruct the CIA to interfere with the FBI's investigation of the crime. And this became a more serious crime than the break-in to begin with. And it's because this was an abuse of presidential power and a deliberate obstruction of justice. And it was established that the president actually didn't even know about the burglary. But as soon as he learned about it, he did everything to cover it up, while lying about it for months. Of course, we all know he eventually resigned because he was about to be impeached, and he didn't want the full extent of his crimes to be exposed. And all of this was uncovered in the Washington Post by reporters and authors Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, whose reporting actually won them a Pulitzer Prize and became the basis for this book.
Very, very interesting. Now, politics aside, I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact of the Watergate scandal on investigative journalism.
Yes.
Now, Watergate is widely accepted as the most famous story in American investigative journalism history. It led to impeachment hearings, President Nixon's resignation from office, and some political ethics laws. It also had a huge impact on the practice of investigative journalism. It sparked interest in investigative reporting for thousands of journalists and students, and set an example for generations to come. And I think that Hollywood may be partly to blame for the spike in interest, because in 1976, Hollywood released a movie based on today's book, starring Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman as Woodward and Bernstein. And the movie focused on the perspective of the two journalists and highlighted their investigative process. According to some, the team's reporting helped unravel the threads of massive criminal conspiracy, exposing political dirty tricks, laundered money, illegal spying, and obstruction of justice. But according to others, Woodward and Bernstein only leaked elements of the prosecutor's case to the public a few days before it would otherwise have come out anyway. Almost 40 years later, the debate about the role journalism played in uncovering the Watergate scandal that forced Nixon from office is yet to be resolved. But one thing is clear. The Watergate scandal glorified journalism, especially investigative journalism. It facilitated the entrenchment of the notion that journalism is a piece of the democratic structure, and that journalists are some sort of democratic stewards with a responsibility to pursue stories that further the interests of democracy using any means available. Well, according to a sociologist called Michael Shudson, in his book Watergate in American Memory, and I quote, "The myth of journalism in Watergate asserts that two young Washington Post reporters brought down the President of the United States. This is a myth of David and Goliath, of powerless individuals overturning an institution of overwhelming might. And the good guys win. The press and truth, its only weapon, saves the day." Now, before journalists far and wide begin to celebrate, remember, it's only a myth.
It is a myth. Now, what was so bad about Watergate? Presidents have done far worse than Nixon. Clinton got caught pants down in the White House with Monica Lewinsky, but he managed that crisis. So what made Watergate so bad? Well, it comes down to two things in my view. First, the extent to which you as the president are rogue, And second, also your likability factor. And here's a simple analogy to illustrate Nixon's folly in getting caught. Suppose there are some robberies in Nairobi. You catch the robbers, and it turns out they all work for Sonko. Then you find out that they were ordered to do the robberies by somebody in Sonko's office. Then you find out that Sonko himself approved paying hush money, as you said, Tujay, to keep the robbers from talking to the robbery detectives, and ordered City Hall employees to lie to the detectives as well. And that's what's so bad about it. You had the person in charge of law enforcement ordering, as you said, Tujay, obstruction of justice. And in the Watergate case, it later also came out that there were crimes ordered by Nixon himself. And he's now known to have ordered even the firebombing of the Brookings Institution. It was a burglary of a psychiatrist's office and the leaking of grand jury testimony, all of which were felonies. So in sum, he was a complete rogue who did not care for the whole concept of plausible deniability. He didn't care for that. He wanted to be known as a gangster. Now, in addition, many forget the grand scandal. Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned after getting convicted for tax fraud. This is his whole vice president at some point, right? And we're told that 48 other government officials were either convicted or pled guilty because of their involvement in the Watergate scandal. How does he compare against some other US presidents? I'll give an example of Reagan. Reagan was just as notorious as Nixon, if not even more, but he always played the aloof actor. He was a very likable fella as well. And he had always some degree of plausible deniability, saying, I was led into these things. I mean, I did this, these are not my machinations. Even the Iran-Contra affair. But here are a few things that his staffers were convicted for. Secretary of the Interior, James Watt, our equivalent of Matiang'i, was sentenced to 5 months probation after getting charged with 25 counts of perjury and obstruction of justice. In the Iran-Contra affair, his biggest scandal, the Reagan administration staff members Elliot Abrams and Robert McFarlane were charged for their role in covertly arming the Nicaraguan Contras in violation of an agreement. The Deputy Chief of Staff, Michael Deaver, received a sentence of 3 years probation after pleading guilty to perjury about lobbying activities. The lobbying that went on in the Reagan years, astronomical. And then there was something something known as a Debategate scandal. This is probably named after Watergate, right?
Yes, all the gates.
Yeah, Debategate scandal, right? So members of the Ronald Reagan campaign, they stole debating notes from President Jimmy Carter's campaign. So in sum, an administration in America doesn't really get criminal until it starts racking up the indictments and convictions from many people within the administration. And based on the number of convictions, the most criminal administrations in US presidential history are two: Ulysses Grant, and in his case, up to over 110 convictions were recorded for just one scandal known as the Whiskey Ring Scandal. And then you've got Richard Nixon coming in at number 2 with at least 48 convictions just in Watergate alone. So,
I guess, it brings
even if you want to be a bastard, you've got to have likability, and you've got to have some sort of plausible deniability so that it's not you getting caught with your hands in the cookie jar.
And it brings up the question, I think Ms. K, we had talked about this earlier, about do the ends justify the means?
I don't know if the ends justify.
And how do you get about that?
But also, your criteria has me thinking about Donald Trump and what would happen and where he'll fall in the scale.
You know what, actually, this one does not include Donald Trump. But he's probably at number, I'd say he's number 3 or number 4.
Somewhere up there in the scale.
Yeah.
Anyway, today we had a winning headline from The Standard. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are on your TV screen. Find us on Pan Free to Air, GoTV and Star Times. Because of the Watergate blunders and missteps, I was inspired by a quote from Mark Twain, and he says, "Sometimes I wonder whether the world is being run by smart people who are putting us on, or by imbeciles who really mean it." Do have a great evening.